Instead of getting someone talking to you about space travel, I'm going to talk to you about time travel. The presentation you're going to see are all photographs taken from the Bank of Stockton's historical photograph collection, numbering now in excess of 31,000. Why does the Bank of Stockton have a photograph collection? In 1990, Bob Eberhardt, who was then the president of the Bank of Stockton, purchased Leonard Cavello's photograph collection, which at that point numbered about 20,000 prints and negatives. And he bought them to preserve them for the community and also to utilize them in branding the bank. Since then, we've grown the collection by 10,000 images. We use it in presentations like this and in creating our calendar. But it's also a community asset that you can come and search through the collection. It's all been cataloged and scanned into a computerized database so that you can come and look for a name, a date, a location, any number of different search mediums, keywords, and see if we have any images of that. Stockton, California, Venice of the West. That was actually a motto that was used by the Chamber of Commerce back in the 30s to promote Stockton and to promote people to come to Stockton and live here and establish businesses here. So that's, I can't take credit for that great phrase of Stockton being the Venice of the West. I have this first photograph of the Stockton State Hospital, which really put Stockton on the map. The gold rush was the reason that Stockton was founded after Charles Weber established his little community here. But then the gold rush is what really made the town grow. And shortly after the city was incorporated in 1850, the first state hospital was established here. And many of you probably do remember the hospital grounds. And this photo comes up first really only because the state hospital was such a landmark and such an important part in the Stockton community during its first 100 years. And also because I originally put together this PowerPoint presentation for the 75th anniversary of the Yacht Club, and the Stockton Yacht Club was founded by one of the doctors at the state hospital. So that's the reason why you're getting the state hospital right out of the chute.
The California Street view?
Yeah, that's looking east from California Street. So Stockton was quite the wide open city in the 1920s, as is witnessed by this little circular that was put out around town, listing the names of all of the various houses of ill repute and drinking establishments that were in operation in town. And you got to remember, this is during Prohibition as well. And the interesting thing about this too is that you'll notice there on the bottom, the people that produced this little flyer is the KKK. The Ku Klux Klan was and here's one of those establishments. Here's B's Place, 15 North Center Street. This was apparently a rather popular brothel in central Stockton. But the KKK had a resurgence in the 1920s throughout the country and in California and in Stockton. Here you see them marching in front of the hotels on horseback in front of the Hotel Stockton down Weber Avenue. But it was really promoted at that time as more of a fraternal organization, and I've heard tell also that it was really being pushed by the manufacturers that sold ceremonial uniforms and ceremonial equipment. Downtown Stockton was quite the bustling metropolis. This is California and Main Streets in 1926, and I love the fact that there's a traffic cop directing traffic, and then up there you've got the court tower and the hotel, the Bank of Stockton building. So this was Stockton bustling in 1926. I'm trying to remember what the population then was. Probably maybe the size of Lodi. It might have been like 30,000. I'm not exactly sure. However, it was the era of Prohibition. So here you see the police chief, Chief Porter, apparently sampling some of the wares that he's confiscated. And the interesting thing, too, is that you'll notice that they're pouring them down the storm drain. And if you recognize where this is on the west side of City Hall, that little driveway that drives underneath there. And that storm, and at that time, McLeod Lake came all the way up to El Dorado Street. So essentially, he's pouring it into the storm drain, and it's just going right into McLeod Lake. But apparently they didn't want to make sure, they didn't want to see all of it go to waste, so they wanted to sample the wares a little bit. And this is one of those pictures that really reminds me of the phrase that photography is an engine of regret. This is Hunter Square as it looked back in the day with the beautiful courthouse. And now there's a new courthouse going up down there, which will, I haven't quite, the jury's not in on it yet, although now the controversy is whether or not they're going to tear down the old one once they get the new one built. But in my humble opinion, when they tore down this courthouse and when they tore down the old jail, they just ripped the heart right out of downtown. And just imagine what it would be like down there now if that building was still there. And here's the jail. This was on the corner of Channel and San Joaquin Streets, otherwise known as Cunningham's Castle. And I've heard tell that you could walk, when they closed it in the early 1960s, that it was like a living museum. Somebody told me you could have put a velvet rope across the door and charged admission to get in. But instead, they tore it down. A few of our other landmarks downtown, you've got there's a nice aerial view of the Civic Center before Center Street was completed and the park was created across the street from City Hall. Back then you could access City Hall and the Civic Auditorium by boat. And then a few other landmarks downtown. On the right, you see the original Masonic Temple building, which was on El Dorado Street, where the cinema complex is now. And then on the left is the current Masonic Temple building at Sutter and Market Street. However, you'll notice, too, that the cornice on the top has been removed. You can see a little bit of the Henry Apartments over there. But the cornice has been removed. Apparently sometime in the 60s, the powers that be decided that was a danger and they were afraid that cornice, because of course, it was all terracotta, and they were afraid that it was going to fall off and bonk somebody on the head, so they took it all off. Downtown Stockton in the 20s and 30s was a commercial and banking center. You've got here on the far left is the commercial building, which was also the Farmers and Merchants Bank there, and then moving to the right you have what was the Bank of America building, and is now Court Towers. That's its original configuration. And then of course further right is the Bank of Stockton's building on San Joaquin and Main, and then you have on the far right you have the Medical Dental building, which housed all of the prominent doctors' offices in town. My office is right across Minor Avenue from the Medical Dental building. The commercial building had a fire it was built in 1915, had a fire in 1923. And it was actually called the Commercial and Savings Bank building. And this is it during the fire in 1923, and then you'll notice that afterwards it basically doubled in size when they rebuilt it. And it still stands there today. It's now referred to as Court Towers. That's where Dan Court runs his real estate empire out of. Downtown, because of Stockton's location, downtown was really at a crossroads. I mean, the highways all came through here, the waterways came here, the railroads came here, and so there were large hotels in the downtown area. So, and Stockton tended to be a stopover point for people going up to the Sierra Nevada and up to Yosemite and whatnot. And of course, the queen of the downtown hotels was really the Hotel Stockton. And here you see a view shortly, probably within 10 years of its opening there. And then the rooftop garden, which has recently reopened in the last few years. As a matter of fact, my wife and her band have a gig there tomorrow night up on the rooftop. And then there's a nice shot of the original lobby and the fireplace with the Indian baskets on the mantle. The fountain is still up on the roof, but it doesn't work anymore. But the Hotel Stockton was only one of many hotels, large hotels downtown. The Hotel Wolf, which was at the corner of Sutter and Market Streets, and there's a nice photograph of its rather opulent lobby. Let me see, the Hotel Wolf was built in 1923. The Hotel Stockton opened in 1911, the Wolf in 1923, and then the Clark, which was just across the street from the Wolf, it opened in 1912. And again, you can see these were sizable hotels with rather luxurious lobbies. And then one of the few that still remains, obviously the Wolf Hotel and the Clark Hotel are not there anymore. However, the Windsor Hotel, also known as the Mansion House, is still there. On the left you see it, and it's on Weber Avenue, it's at Weber and Hunter. On the left you see it as it originally looked when it was first built. It was built in 1873, and then by the time that second photograph was taken in 1947, they had covered up all of that elaborate terracotta work with a kind of Art Deco, much more kind of plain and modern facade, and that's pretty much the way it looks today. And then, of course, there was the Fox Theater. The Fox Theater opened in 1930, and was, quite the picture palace, of its day. And that's, I think, we came that close to tearing the Fox Theater down. And I can vividly remember Ralph White, when he was on the city council, saying, we just need to tear that ragged old building down. And what were they going to do with it? They were going to make yet another parking lot out of it. But luckily, some more forward-thinking folks in town rescued it, and then the city spent $8 million restoring it. And as far as I'm concerned, that's probably the best $8 million that the city has spent in recent memory. Some other downtown landmarks, which are obviously no longer there. On the left, you have the Imperial Hotel, which was built in 1898, and that was at Main and Aurora Streets. And if you go to Main and Aurora, the bottom floor is still there. But the rest of it is all gone. On the bottom floor, you can only recognize it because of the arched doorways and the corner door. And then in the upper right, you have the McMullen Building, which was on the corner of El Dorado and Main. That was built in 1890. It was on the southeast corner of El Dorado and Main. And then you have in the lower right, you have the IXL building, which was a clothing store. That was built in the 1870s. That was on the northwest corner of Main and El Dorado, where the police annex is now. And that building was there until the mid-1960s. And it was in relatively good shape. I was kind of surprised that they tore it down, because I've got photographs of it, and it looked to be in pretty good shape. But ours is not to reason why, I guess. So back in the 20s and 30s, Stockton had streetcars. Actually, we'd had streetcars since much earlier than that. We had horse-drawn streetcars originally, and then eventually they were electrified, although that turned to be a little problematic in the late 1800s and the early 20th century after they electrified them, because Stockton downtown flooded almost every year. And the last great flood downtown was in 1907, and so they had to drag out all the horse-drawn streetcars because they couldn't run the electric ones because there was 2 feet of water on like Channel and El Dorado and Weber Street. So, but this is a much more modern. This is a more 30s era streetcar. But we're going to hop on a little streetcar and head out north and take a quick tour of the north area. And as you would head out north on the streetcar ran up El Dorado Street, and it would take you past the few remaining Victorians that were still on El Dorado at that time in the 1930s. At one point, El Dorado had pretty much been lined with big Victorian piles. But by the 1920s and 1930s, as the automobile became much more prominent, the Victorians were either torn down or moved off of El Dorado Street, and El Dorado became populated by garages and auto dealers. And there's one of the garages there in the upper right. But also they started building apartment houses along El Dorado Street. And that's the Mayfair Apartments there, which is also known as the Home Apartments. And let's see, that was, I don't have the date that was built, but probably in the 1920s, 1930s maybe. But that's still there. And then as you continued north, you would get to the Eden Apartments. The Eden Apartments were built in 1921 by Senator Boggs. He owned and built the apartments, and he lived in the penthouse up on top there. They're the top floor, which in 1931 burned. And they saved the building, but they didn't save the penthouse. So now when you go by, the Eden Square Apartments are still there, but the penthouse floor is gone. And then we continue north up El Dorado and take a jog over to Pacific Avenue and to Tuxedo Park area and the Miracle Mile. And the Miracle Mile, you know, all valley towns seem to have a Miracle Mile, and apparently it was the name that was given to any shopping district that, the first shopping district that existed outside the downtown area. And that designation goes to the Pacific Avenue area, because when the University of the Pacific came to Stockton in 1924, things were starting, that area was starting to be developed out there, Boers Park and Tuxedo Park, but once the university came to town, then that really took off, and that stretch of Pacific Avenue became a central commercial district. And of course there you see the original Tuxedo Park sign on the corner there, and that's Country Club and Tuxedo, or Country Club and Pacific on the right. And then oddly enough, the photograph on the left, as fate would have it, would be as if you were standing in the door of my bookstore on Pacific Avenue looking southeast. That's the corner of Doris and Pacific Avenue. And of course, as we continue north, we go by the new campus of the University of the Pacific. And the streetcar line, there was a streetcar line that did actually go all the way out to the university and then service the university from downtown. And then you'd have to jump off the streetcar and hop into your Tin Lizzie or whatever and head on out to Otto's 5 Mile House, which is out at Hammer Lane. There was a Union Safe Deposit Bank there, and I guess the Bank of the West Bank was there. But that's the 5 mile, it was called Otto's 5 Mile House because it was 5 miles down to the port. So we're going to hop on another little streetcar here and head out to a few of the other landmarks. We're going to head a little northeast on what was known as the Ophir Railroad Line. And I always thought it's O-P-H-I-R, and I always thought it was Ophir, but everybody tells me that it was pronounced Ophir. So you'd hop on the Ophir car and head out past the old Lincoln High School, which was out east, and that was built in 1895. Continuing out east, you would go past Julia Weber's house, which was out on West Lane. It had originally been on Weber Point, but was moved in 1901 out to some property out on West Lane. And then in 2001, the Bank of Stockton owned the property, and the Bank of Stockton paid to have the house moved out to Mickey Grove, where it is now. And they had to cut it, they had to cut the house in half and jack it up, put it on trucks, take it out to Mickey Grove. But it's still preserved and still out there. And then on Weber Point, there's the footprint of Weber's original house, not this house, but of Charles Weber's original house on Weber Point. There's an outline of the footprint still on Weber Point. So then we're going to head south down El Dorado Street and go by the Stockton Lumber Company, which is another great, commercial Art Deco building. Unfortunately, another one that's not there. The footprint of the building is still there, but the rest of it is gone. And go down to McKinley, you would get down to the Stockton Municipal Baths. And there was, these were an elaborate series of pools with the bridge you can see in the background and changing houses. There was a tall tower and diving towers, and it was where everybody pretty much hung out in the summertime. And here you see a few of the local bathing beauties.
Hot spring there too.
There was, well, the hot springs tended to be, there were a number of gas heated springs. Like there was even one at where the Hotel Stockton is now there was a well, and then they heated the water with gas that they also got out of the same well. It wasn't natural heated, no. And then if you continued even further south on El Dorado, you would get to Stockton's first airport down there on Sharps Lane. The first commercial airplane flights out of Stockton used to land in what is now Tuxedo Park, just north of Smith Canal, when that was all just fields. The planes would land out there and bring mail and whatnot to Stockton, but that was considerably earlier than this. That would have been in the teens. So there's, and I love this is a photograph that I picked up at an estate sale or on eBay or something, and I like the fact that, that he couldn't be bothered to repaint the entire plane. Apparently he had a breakup with his partner, so he just, blocked out the guy's name there on the side of the plane, and just painted over it, and they went about their business. Another little, just a little landmark out on the east side, out on Waterloo Road, was the Venice Hospital, which is, again, just kind of a cool little building that is no longer there, of course. And then this is one of those things, one of those bizarre, I don't know what you'd call this thing. It's an art installation. This is like Stockton's version of the Watts Towers. It was over in the Fair Oaks district, and the guy that built it, they called him Joe Prince, but his real name was Leo Brenz. So I guess that's kind of like Joe Prince. But he constructed this thing on his property out of back then oil came in these big cans. And he would cut the cans up, and you can see that wall here is constructed out of all these cans, as are the towers. And then he would put found objects. He'd just stack them on top and weld them together, or nail them together, or wire them together. I'm not exactly sure, but you've got a wagon up there. There's a bicycle. There's he's formulated the cans into like American flags there, and these apparently stood for several years on his property until finally they either fell down or were torn down. But it's stuff like that that just, it's astonishing when you run across this sort of stuff. And then Stockton's greatest landmark is not land at all. It's water. We are, blessed by having a water feature and a waterfront that any city in the world would love to have. And many cities in California many of them just down the road would love to have. But yet we have this wonderful water feature, and while for many, many years it was a huge economic engine in the city and in the state, in the last half a century, we've pretty much just kind of let it go to seed until now it's action-packed with issues now, and we'll see whether it ever comes back. But this is a view looking west down the channel probably taken from the rooftop garden of the Hotel Stockton. And there in the channel you have the Captain Weber and the Fort Sutter paddle wheel steamers. So now we're going to get in an airplane. We've taken the train, we've taken the car, so now we're going to get in an airplane and we're going to take a kind of a survey of the western part of Stockton. This is a nice aerial view showing the deep water, the channel head, and the McLeod Lake there in the lower left. A couple of nice steamboats sitting there opposite the flour mill on the north side of the North Shore. And then we're going to take a little run west. Here's the entry where Mormon Slough comes off of the channel, goes down to the south. And then as we continue further west, we find the San Joaquin River, where the San Joaquin River comes in. Well, actually, the channel meets the San Joaquin River. And there's the rickety old bridge that people have told me about. And now we're going to continue west. This is the area where Stockton Golf and Country Club is now. You can just barely, if you look real close, you can barely see there's the original clubhouse, and if you can see the outline of some of the golf holes. Stockton has a long history of boat building, which is another one of those things that we really need to showcase some of these historical manufacturing and economic aspects of our city, which we really don't. The Hagen Museum's got some things, the County Museum has some things, but we really should have a maritime museum, because that was a big driver in the city in the early days. Here you see the Delta King and the Delta Queen under construction on the north shore of the Stockton Channel. They were both, their superstructures, their steel frames were actually fabricated in Scotland, and then they were floated over and around the Horn and brought to Stockton, and then they were outfitted in Stockton with all of the luxurious accoutrement that these floating palaces received back in the day. But Stockton also has a long history of small boat manufacturing as well. The Stevens brothers had been building boats in Stockton pretty much one at a time, handcrafted small boats since the turn of the century. And then there was Kohlberg's, and there were other small boat manufacturers at the same time. This is the Stevens. This is the one on the top is the Stevens boat, the Alert, which they actually built for George Shima, who was the potato king and was growing potatoes rather successfully out in the Delta at the time.
That's who the Shima building is named after.
Right. Yep. We've got all this water. We're on the edge of 1,000 miles of waterway, so there was all kinds of activity that went down on the Stockton Channel. Here you see some folks waiting along the channel there, and there's a little barge going by in the background. Yosemite Lake in American Legion Park on Smith Canal. After the baths on McKinley kind of lost their luster, and when Smith Canal was originally dug in the 1880s as a flood control measure, and then they dug the lake out. They dug Yosemite Lake out in the 20s in order to get fill dirt so that they could start building houses out towards Pixie Woods. So Yosemite Lake became Stockton's swimming hole. And the high schools used to have elaborate pageants and things on the lake shore involving hundreds of students. The lake had a boathouse. It had a floating dock, as you can see. It was the Stockton swimming hole for several decades. put out of business in the 1950s with the polio scare, because polio is a waterborne pathogen, and so people, they decided that the water was in Smith Canal and in Yosemite Lake was too polluted for humans to safely be able to swim in. And that, unfortunately, has even gotten worse. But still, you know, the water downtown, this is McLeod Lake. There were all kinds of boats. There was a thriving houseboat community in the downtown area. They called them arcs back then. But you had all these you had sailboats, you had motorboats. This is looking southwest or southeast across McLeod Lake. So there's the Masonic Temple that you saw earlier, and then you can see the dome of the courthouse peeking up there in the background. And there is St. John's Episcopal Church. And there used to be regular boat races downtown on the channel. There was a regatta. Here you see motorized boats as well as rowboats being raced on the channel. There were steamboat races. The one on the left is actually a staged photograph from a Hollywood movie. However, the one on the right is actually was a race between Stockton and Sacramento. The mayors of Stockton and Sacramento challenged each other to a steamboat race, and Stockton was victorious. By the time these were built, these were the King and Queen of the Delta were built in the 20s, and most of the boiler explosions and accidents happened in the late 1800s and the early 20th century, and it was usually because of guys were racing.
Push them a little too hard.
Push them a little too hard, yeah. And then, of course, you know, there's the San Joaquin River, idyllic for fishing. You know, go out and get your little pole out, and they're in their nice little hut there, you know, and on the San Joaquin River. And then, as I said, Stockton used to flood regularly. And this is a photograph taken during the last great flood of 1907. After the flood of 07, they said enough is enough, and they built the diverting canal, which took water from Mormon Slough across and connected it to the Calaveras River, because you know, you had this you know, perfect configuration. You had water coming from Mormon Slough, coming from the east, being, you know, fed by the Sierra snowpack or rain runoff, the San Joaquin River, the Calaveras River, all of them converging right out here just to the west of us, and the volume of water would just back up into downtown and flood the streets. So this is a postcard. This is what's known as a real photo postcard, and it's somebody that they took this picture with their little brownie or whatever, and then took it to a photographer who printed it up and put it on a postcard so that then they could just address it and mail it to their friends and say, you know, here we are at the intersection of El Dorado and Minor Avenue, because you can see St. John's Episcopal Church there in the background, and the tide must be going out, judging by the water on the horse's legs there, and then the wheels of the wagon. The water seems to be flowing to the west, so the tide must be going out.
Wasn't there one in 54, 55?
Funny you should ask.
Yeah.
The last flood, great flood downtown was in 07. However, the last great flood in the city of Stockton, in the city limits, was in 1955, and that was in Christmas of 1955. And again, what they tried to do was the diverting canal failed, and so they tried to put water back into Mormon Slough. However, they had closed many of the bridges and turned them into culverts. So when they tried to put water in it, it had nowhere to go except out of the channel, and so it flooded the entire south side of Stockton. And this is about where the I-5 freeway is now. The I-5 freeway kind of runs up through here. This is Edison High School's football stadium, which is completely full of water. And then you've got Turnpike Road, and then Charter Way, MLK Way up there on the top there. Or actually, there's MLK Way right there. And yeah, we've got a whole bunch of photographs from that flood of 55 of people waiting, in some of these neighborhoods just chest deep in water.
Yeah, my father's house was 1300 South San Joaquin, and the whole basement flooded, and there's high water marks on the furniture.
Yep. And that is pretty much your historic survey of the city of Stockton and environs in the 1920s and 1930s. With that, I hope I didn't bore you all too bad, and I hope I didn't disappoint you, but thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them. Yes?
Looking at this, I'm just wondering if you can assess the need for the flood insurance in...
Oh, don't get me started. I live on Smith Canal.
Oh, boy.
So thankfully I'm at the east end of Smith Canal, so my assessment for the floodgate is relatively little. I mean, I think my assessment is like $16 a year, but there are other people who are paying hundreds of dollars a year. Because I'm so far to the east, I am not required to get flood insurance, despite the fact that I live on the canal. My insurance, according to the FEMA maps, any flooding in my area will be less than a foot. There are people that are on the west end of Smith Canal that are having to pay thousands of dollars every year in flood insurance.
Well, I'm just wondering, I live 2 blocks west of Victory Park, and I think that's in that area. So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if, it's a lot of money for flood insurance.
Yeah, it's a scam, pure and simple. Smith Canal was built in the 1880s as a flood control measure. It has never flooded since. And the reason it was built was because there used to be the North Street Channel, which North Street back then was what is now Harding Way, and the North Street Channel was an open ditch that was seasonally stream fed from the east, and it would flow into the marshy area and into the croplands to the west. Well, the state hospital was built, and the state hospital started dumping their raw sewage into the North Street Channel, the North Street Canal, and so spring had come along and it would wash all their raw sewage onto Mr. Smith's croplands. And Mr. Smith got tired of it, and so he threatened to sue, and so he got together with the city council and the state legislature. They came up with the money to dig the Smith Canal to connect the North Street Canal with the San Joaquin River, and so and to avoid the flooding. And then since then, and then the lake was built. The canal, the North Street Canal, was covered in and turned into culverts. Basically, it became the storm drain system. So the entire storm drain system for central Stockton drains into Yosemite Lake and Smith Canal and then goes out to the San Joaquin River. But it's never flooded since the 1880s. The levee behind my house is 11 feet above mean tide.
Yeah, it's higher than anything around.
And so, this whole thing with the floodgates, its sole purpose is to appease FEMA. Because FEMA, if they can't certify the levee, their modeling says it doesn't exist. And they were so inaccurate when they did their first map of Stockton, they didn't even have Smith Canal existing east of Pershing. Because there were no reclamation districts east of Pershing. So as far as they were concerned, Smith Canal ended at Pershing, and the canal and the lake did not exist on their maps. So the whole thing is just one big boondoggle, but they're the feds, and as Larry Roostaller told me one time, there's no sense trying to talk sense into them, because they are not inclined to be subjected to rational thought. Don't confuse them with the facts, exactly.